Hi, this is Tim Santoni, and welcome to the Santoni Spotlight. Today, Martin Dack joins us. Martin, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Tim.
Before we get started, maybe give the viewers a little bit of a sense of your background and your history and your career and kind of what led you to where you are now as a business litigator and having your own practice.
Okay, well, I've been an attorney for 20 years. Started out at a mid-sized law firm, handled all types of matters, business litigation, real estate litigation, some trust litigation, a little transactional, pretty much thrown into every different type of case there is. And then as time went on, I kind of whittled that down to business litigation and a couple other areas that I felt like I wanted to be involved in. Left that mid-sized firm, worked at a couple other firms, and then eventually went on my own with my partner about 15 years ago. Just recently separated from my partner, so now I have one associate that works for me and primarily doing business litigation and kind of still dabbling in a few other things, trust litigation and real estate.
Very good, very good. So I think when people talk about litigation, or for me in the investigative side, I think people sometimes get confused about what that means in terms of what it means overall, and I think people think of litigation as going to court.
Right.
And so maybe give a little background on the typical kind of client or scenario you would work on that's kind of quasi-litigation or litigation that involves probably negotiation and some counseling from your point of view.
Yeah, most of litigation is any sort of dispute, a civil dispute, and I'm usually involved in probably 90% of my cases are usually pre-lawsuit. The goal is to try to avoid court because it's very expensive. For anyone who's been involved, well, you know the court system is, it's very expensive. So you try to come up with a settlement for them prior to even filing a lawsuit. Sometimes that's not possible, but the typical type of case I'm in is usually a small business that's maybe being torn apart with the partners or the owners of the company, or there could be a dispute with maybe a former employee, but it's usually a small business that's having some sort of a dispute. Primarily internally these days. It seems like the kind of case I get.
Like a business divorce type of situation?
Oh yeah, you get family members or friends who start a business and they don't put any effort into it up front to have the proper formalities and documents they would need in case a dispute arises later, and they don't turn to the attorney until there's a dispute, and then sometimes they don't have the documents that they need, like a shareholders agreement or an operating agreement, to resolve that dispute.
So that's a good point. So obviously some of this stuff can be avoided until people face that adversity and that litigation. They don't realize it. But my guess is that after they go through that, those are some recommendations you would counsel and provide. So as part of your practice, what are some, like you mentioned shareholder agreements, but what are some top things you see that people could have done preventatively that really would have helped either in settling the dispute or settling it for more amicably or for less money?
Right. Well, I've had some individuals very recently who used an online service to create an LLC or a S Corp or whatever business they started.
Sure.
And they just used the form documents and didn't really think, well, they didn't know. They didn't know what might happen in the future. And specifically, I have a occurrence where two ladies went into business for themselves, sisters, and they had an operating agreement that did not prevent one of them from sharing her ownership interest to a third party without the other sister approving of that.
Jeez.
And so that's exactly what happened. They got into a fight. One sister sells her interest to this other person, so now my client is in business with someone she doesn't even know. I mean, that's a pretty typical thing you would have in an operating agreement, is to, in a small business like that, is to make sure that when you're partnering up with someone, you have the right to say, who am I going to be partnering in the future with? So little things like that, when they do things online or don't know the repercussions of their actions, usually I get involved in those after the fact.
Sure, that's a great example. Those online services, right, seem like at the moment they seem like it'd be useful and it's more cost effective, but the long-term ramifications and so as part of that practice, so you get to know the business owners and you get to know the people involved, the shareholders or whatever else. What are some other things that you're typically guiding or advising in the course of litigation that come up that, the top two or three things that you usually see come up, they're like, gosh, besides the agreements, but other things they could have in place that would help them greatly in terms of in the litigation process? Well,
one thing, it's not really a legal matter, but they never have insurance. They really need to have insurance if they've done anything with their business and they're becoming successful. They need to protect that business.
Right.
And I find that a lot of them do not have business insurance, commercial general liability policies, and at some point they're being sued by a competitor or a former employee, and the first thing I look to is, do you have insurance? And they don't. And it makes a big difference in the case, because if you have insurance, you're not paying all this money to defend your case, and it puts you in a better settlement position.
Sure.
If you are paying out of pocket for litigation without the benefit of having any insurance backing you up, you're in a different settlement position. You
Right.
may end up settling for something that's not the greatest deal because you're getting buried with costs of litigation.
Yeah.
So that's one thing is insurance. What I already touched on is, the formalities of an organization need to be adhered to. I've had a client who started a business, and the two gentlemen went into business, and they literally started their business on a napkin. They wrote out 50% each, real simple terms. Well, that business was going on for 15 years and ended up being a multi-million-dollar business. They expanded a bunch of states. We got into litigation, and that was the document we went back to and said, this is what you started with, but they never adhered to any corporate formalities. They kept just creating all these LLCs across the country. It was a mess. So you need to get the advice of an attorney. Otherwise, it ends up costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars in court costs when you end up in a huge trial.
Sure. It's a great point. I think that in today's day and age too, I think that people assume that sometimes there's an assumption, especially with employers, that there's insurance there, and so they're filing a lawsuit with the expectation that there's some settlement dollars in there. And like you say, it hurts both the business and it hurts the people that maybe have been harmed legitimately or illegitimately, but there's just not as many dollars there to kind of fund the litigation. And so, Martin, when you're not litigating and advising businesses, where do you like to spend some of your free time, and when you have that free time available?
Well, what little free time I have, I like to travel. I don't do a lot of traveling, but my wife and I, like to go on, 1 week trips a couple times a year. I do like going to the gym and working out. Unfortunately, I also like to eat. So, for every calorie I burn at the gym, I probably eat 3 calories. So I like sports. I'm a Rams season ticket holder. I like to go to sporting events, and between that and my 3 20-something kids, I'm pretty busy with the family things.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it. We'll make sure to link up all of Martin's information in the description below. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and we'll make sure that one of us gets back to you. Martin, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thanks.